Hello there, and welcome to the deep somna. Maybe your thoughts haven't quite settled yet. Maybe the day is still moving through you in small, restless waves. A half-remembered conversation, a task you meant to finish, a question that arrived too late in the evening to be answered. That's all right. You don't need to push any of it away. You can simply let it be there, softening at the edges, the way sound softens when you close a window against the night. Tonight, we are going to wander somewhere quiet. Not away from the world, exactly, but deeper into it. Into the part of reality that science has been circling for centuries without quite reaching the center. We are going to explore the one thing that makes all exploring possible: consciousness itself. The fact that you are here, listening, aware that you are listening. The fact that right now, in this moment, there is something it feels like to be you. That may sound simple, but the more carefully anyone looks at it, the more extraordinary it becomes. Let yourself sink a little further into wherever you are resting. There is nothing you need to hold on to for this. The ideas will move through you gently, like a current beneath still water. If some of them blur before you finish hearing them, that's perfectly fine. You can let the details go. What tends to remain, long after the specifics drift away, is something quieter. A sense of scale, a sense of wonder, a sense that the universe you live inside is far stranger and far more generous than the ordinary day usually has time to reveal. So let's begin at the beginning. Or rather, let's begin with what the beginning always seems to lead back to: the question of what it means to be aware at all. Right now, electrical signals are traveling through your brain. Billions of tiny cells, each one smaller than you can imagine, are firing and resting and firing again. Ions are crossing microscopic membranes. Currents are flickering along fibers thinner than the finest thread. And somehow, out of all of that vast and intricate electrical conversation happening entirely in the dark, inside your skull, there is this, a sense of presence, a sense of now, the soft weight of your body against the surface beneath you, the rhythm of your breathing, which has probably slowed already without you trying. That gap between the electricity and the experience is what scientists call the hard problem of consciousness. Not hard in the sense of complicated math or difficult experiments, though it is certainly both of those things. Hard in the sense of fundamental, in the sense of resistant to the usual tools. You can measure a brain down to extraordinary detail. You can watch it light up in different patterns when a person looks at a color, or hears a piece of music, or tries to remember a name. You can trace the pathways, map the networks, time the signals to fractions of a millisecond. And still, after all of that, the question remains: why does any of it feel like something? Why isn't it all just processing happening in the dark, without anyone home to witness it? The philosopher David Chalmers gave that question its name, the hard problem, in the mid-1990s. And in the decades since, it has not been solved. It has been approached from many directions. It has inspired some of the most careful and imaginative thinking in modern science. But the gap between the neural and the felt, between the measurable and the experienced, remains open. Not in a frightening way, more like the way a particular horizon always stays a horizon. Not because you can't keep walking toward it, but because it keeps revealing more of itself the closer you get. You don't need to solve it tonight. Nobody has. What you can do is simply rest in the presence of the question. Feel what it's like to be here, listening, aware, and let that experience itself be the beginning of the inquiry. Your brain, right now, is producing about 20 watts of electrical power. A gentle amount, about the same as a dim incandescent bulb. It seems impossibly modest for what it's doing. Because in those 20 watts, your brain is not only maintaining your breathing and your heartbeat, and the quiet regulation of your body temperature, it is running a version of the world, a full, detailed, emotionally textured interior model of reality that feels utterly continuous, utterly seamless, utterly real. The hum of whatever is in the next room. The particular sensation of the fabric beneath your hand. The sound of this voice arriving as pressure waves and being converted through a series of biological transformations you'll never consciously observe into meaning. All of that in 20 watts. In the soft dark behind your eyes, neuroscientists, when they look at the brain in action, see something that resembles less a single unified system and more a vast, distributed conversation. Different regions handling different aspects of the moment. One cluster of cells helping you locate sound in space. Another tracking the emotional weight of what you're hearing. Another monitoring your body's needs. Another weaving together past memories to give context to the present moment. And somewhere in all of that, a kind of integration takes place, a binding together of these separate streams into the one coherent experience you call now. How that binding happens is not fully understood. There are theories, as we'll explore, but the sheer scale of the coordination involved is remarkable to sit with. You are not a simple receiver, passively picking up signals from the world. You are a vast and intricate construction process, building your experience of reality moment by moment, faster than you could ever consciously track. Let your breathing slow a little. You don't need to think about any of this carefully. Just let it settle. One of the things that makes consciousness so difficult to study is that it cannot be observed from the outside. You can watch a brain. You can measure its activity with extraordinary precision, using technologies that track the magnetic fields generated by neural currents, or that trace the flow of oxygenated blood through different regions. These tools have taught us an enormous amount about which parts of the brain do what, and how activity changes with different states. Sleep, waking, meditation, dreaming. But the experience itself, the felt quality of what it is like to see blue or hear a low note, or feel the first breath of morning air, that doesn't show up in any scan. It is known only from the inside, and so consciousness research depends, at its core, on a peculiar act of trust. The assumption that when someone says they experienced something, something was indeed experienced. That trust, it turns out, is complicated by some of the most remarkable discoveries in modern neuroscience. There are people, for instance, who lose conscious vision, not because their eyes stop working, but because a specific region of the visual cortex is damaged. The image arrives. The eye transmits its signals faithfully. But something further along the chain fails, and the person reports seeing nothing in part of their visual field. And yet, if you ask them to guess where a moving object is, they can more accurately than chance alone would allow. If you ask them to reach for something they claim not to see, their hand finds it. The phenomenon is called blindsight, and it suggests something quietly astonishing. The brain can process visual information completely, guide behavior on the basis of it, without that information ever rising into awareness, without anyone, so to speak, being home to witness it. This means that consciousness is not the same thing as neural processing. Enormous amounts of processing happen outside the spotlight of awareness. What makes something conscious? What makes it enter the felt world rather than remaining purely mechanical is a further question beyond the processing itself. You can let that idea drift if it starts to feel complicated. The important shape of it is this: awareness is something more specific than mere activity. It is a particular quality of experience that the brain, in certain states, produces. What determines what gets to enter awareness and what stays in the background remains one of the deepest questions in science. The brain, even when you are fully awake, is not consciously aware of most of what it does. Your heart keeps beating. Your balance adjusts itself constantly, making dozens of tiny corrections per second as you shift in place. Your immune system responds to signals without your knowing. Your digestive system manages complex chemistry. And just beneath the level of what you notice, enormous amounts of pattern recognition, emotional assessment, predictive modeling, and memory retrieval are happening at speeds that conscious thought cannot approach. What we call consciousness may be less like the full operation of the mind and more like a particular window the mind opens onto certain aspects of its own workings. A focused beam of awareness moving through a much larger dark space. This is not a diminishment. If anything, it makes the experience of being conscious more striking. Out of everything the brain does, something is selected, brought into the light of felt experience. The smell of rain, the ache of a particular kind of tiredness, the pleasure of a melody resolving on the note you expected. These are what makes it across the threshold, and though we don't fully understand why they make it and other processes don't, we know the threshold is real and meaningful and somehow at the center of what we are. Let yourself be still. Your breathing can soften further. If your eyes have been drifting closed, you can let them rest there. There is something strange and beautiful about the fact that you are aware right now. Not in a dramatic sense, simply in the most literal sense. There is something it is like to be here, on this particular evening, in this particular body, in this particular quiet. Whatever the day held, and it may have held plenty. Right now there is just this. The slow inward turn, the gradual loosening of the day's edges, and the question we are circling, what is consciousness? Turns out to be deeply personal in a way that most scientific questions are not. Because you don't need a telescope to look at it. You don't need a particle accelerator or a supercomputer. The phenomenon you are trying to understand is the very thing doing the understanding. Consciousness is the one subject that is completely available to any observer who has it, and completely invisible to any observer who doesn't. That paradox, being simultaneously the closest possible thing to yourself, and somehow unable to fully see what you are, has occupied philosophers for centuries before neuroscience was even a word. Ancient thinkers puzzled over the relationship between the body and the mind, between matter and awareness. And though the tools available to explore that question have changed beyond recognition since then, the question itself is startlingly unchanged. How does the stuff of the world give rise to the experience of being in it? In more recent centuries, as science developed the ability to look inside living brains, first through the study of injury and disease, then through imaging and electrical recording, the shape of the question became more specific. It became clear that the brain is the organ of consciousness. That damage to certain regions reliably alters or abolishes specific aspects of experience. That the chemistry of the brain shapes mood, memory, perception, and sense of self in ways that are consistent and measurable. That consciousness is, at minimum, intimately dependent on the brain. Even if the relationship is not yet fully understood, one of the most remarkable early lessons came not from laboratory experiments, but from a catastrophic accident in the mid-19th century. A young man working on a railroad was involved in an explosion. An iron rod was driven through his skull, passing through the front part of his brain and out the top. He survived. He retained his language, his memory, his ability to move and work. By any ordinary measure, he recovered. But those who knew him said he was, in some essential sense, a different person. The patient, Phineas Gage, had been known as responsible, careful, socially skilled. After the accident, his behavior became impulsive and inconsistent. His social judgment was damaged in ways that outlasted any other obvious symptom. The region of the brain that was destroyed, the prefrontal cortex, particularly toward the front and bottom, turned out to be central to something we now recognize as a crucial component of consciousness. Not merely the processing of the world around us, but the regulation of how we respond to it, how we weigh consequences, how we hold social roles and expectations in mind, how we remain, in a certain sense, a stable and coherent self across time. Personality. That quality we tend to think of as the most private and unchangeable part of who we are, is rooted in neural structures. When those structures change, the self that depended on them changes too. It is a quietly sobering thing to sit with. Not frightening, just honest. The self is real. And the self is built from something physical, something that the universe spent billions of years arranging into the particular configuration that is you. You don't need to feel unsettled by that. Many people find it remarkable rather than threatening. The thought that something as intimate as your sense of who you are is a form of matter that the cosmos has, somehow, organized into awareness. You are not separate from the physical world. You are a part of it that has become able to notice itself, a region of the universe looking inward. Let that thought settle softly. There's no need to grip it. You can let the next few images come and go like slow clouds. Picture your brain as it is right now, roughly the weight of a small melon, nested in the quiet darkness inside your skull. Its surface folded into ridges and valleys. Those folds are how 3 kilograms of neural tissue fits inside a space so small. If you could spread the cortex flat, it would cover roughly the area of a pillowcase. And across that surface, and through the layered structures beneath it, perhaps 86 billion neurons are distributed. Each one a cell that speaks in electricity. Each one connected to thousands of others through long extensions called axons and dendrites. The total number of connections, synapses, is estimated in the hundreds of trillions. More than the number of stars in several galaxies laid end to end. And through all of those connections, signals are traveling. Right now, even in the quietest moments of rest, the brain is not silent. It hums with what neuroscientists call resting state activity, patterns of slow, rhythmic firing that persist even when you are doing nothing at all, thinking of nothing in particular, simply existing. These rhythms are not random. They are organized. They shift as you relax further, as you pass through different depths of rest, as you approach and enter sleep. Those rhythms have names. Gamma waves, the fastest, cycling more than 30 times per second, are associated with moments of integration, when the brain is binding together information from different sources into a single coherent perception. When you recognize a face or understand a sentence, or suddenly feel that two ideas connect, gamma activity often rises briefly and then subsides. Slower than gamma are beta waves, present during alert and engaged thinking. Slower still are alpha waves, 10 or so cycles per second, which tend to emerge when you close your eyes and let external attention release. You may be producing them now or something close to them. Alpha is often described as the rhythm of relaxed wakefulness, of the mind turning inward without urgency. Below alpha are theta waves, 4 to 7 cycles per second. These are common in light sleep and drowsiness, in deep meditation, in the hypnagogic state, that soft and often visually rich threshold between waking and sleep, where images can appear and dissolve with a quality that is almost, but not quite, like dreaming. If you find yourself noticing images behind your closed eyes, shapes, colors, brief scenes, that may be where you are now. The theta range. The doorway, and deepest of all, are delta waves. Fewer than 4 cycles per second. These dominate in the deepest stages of sleep, when consciousness recedes furthest, when the body turns most fully to repair and the brain to a kind of slow, regenerative housekeeping. The very word slow may already be beginning to feel like something physical, something that wants to draw you downward. You don't need to stay with all of this. Let it become background, like a voice heard from another room. What matters, in the gentle sense that something can matter when you are almost asleep, is the image. The brain is a place of rhythms, not a static machine, but a dynamic and shifting ocean of electrical patterns, each state a different character of experience. Wakefulness and sleep and dreaming are not simply on and off, they are different compositions played on the same instrument, and your brain moves through all of them, night after night, with a fluency and a purpose that science is still learning to fully read. There is a particular kind of wonder that comes from realizing how much of your inner life is built in silence, without your permission or your participation. Not in a troubling way, more in the way that a river doesn't need your permission to find its course. The brain has its own deep logic, its own quiet preferences, and one of the most striking places where that becomes visible is in the study of what happens when consciousness is interrupted, when the light, so to speak, briefly goes out. Some epileptic seizures do not announce themselves with dramatic convulsions. There is a type known as an absent seizure, and the name is apt. A person may be mid-sentence, or reaching for a cup, or simply sitting quietly, and then, for a few seconds, they are simply not there. Not in any external sense. They don't fall. They may remain upright. Their eyes may stay open, or fix on something, and then they return, often without any awareness that time has passed. The conversation resumes, the hand continues its movement. There is no memory of the gap, because in the gap, no memory was being formed. Consciousness was suspended, not slowed, not dimmed, but briefly absent, and the return to it felt seamless from the inside. This is one of the things that makes consciousness so strange as an object of study. It doesn't feel like it could ever simply stop. It feels continuous, unbroken, the same stream from moment to moment. But this feeling of continuity is itself constructed. It is something the brain produces. A kind of narrative stitching that joins one moment to the next and creates the illusion of uninterrupted flow. When the stitching is interrupted, as it is in an absent seizure, the person doesn't experience the gap. They simply skip over it, the way a dream sometimes skips from one scene to another without any felt discontinuity, even when the scenes are entirely unrelated. The brain, it turns out, is a master of filling in. Not just in time, but in space. Your visual system, for instance, has a blind spot, a point on the retina where the optic nerve connects, and where there are no photoreceptors at all. You have never seen anything in that location, and yet you have never noticed the hole, because the brain quietly fills it in, using information from the surrounding areas to generate a seamless visual field. The gap is real. The seamlessness is constructed. This is a theme that runs through consciousness research with remarkable consistency. Much of what feels like direct, unmediated experience is in fact a model, a representation, a best guess. The brain takes incomplete information because it always receives incomplete information and builds the most coherent version it can. What arrives in awareness is not the world as it is, but the world as the brain has reconstructed it to be. Usually that reconstruction is accurate enough to be useful and fluid enough to feel completely real. But in certain circumstances, the seams become visible. The reconstruction falters, and what was invisible becomes briefly apparent. Let that idea rest gently in you. The world you experience is real, but it is also interpreted, built, held together by a process so fast and so habitual that you never normally catch it in the act. Right now, the sounds you hear, and the sensations you feel, and the quiet visual impressions behind your eyelids are all being assembled, quietly and continuously, by the same organ that is also dreaming and remembering and slowly, gently, beginning to let go. You can let your body be a little heavier now. Let the surface beneath you hold you. One of the places where this reconstructive nature of consciousness becomes most vivid is in the phenomenon of dreaming. During rapid eye movement sleep, the stage most associated with the richest and most narrative dreams, the brain is, by some measures, nearly as active as it is during waking. Certain visual and emotional regions are highly engaged. The motor cortex is active, though signals are blocked from reaching the muscles, which is why you don't act out your dreams. And the areas associated with critical judgment, the parts that would normally notice something impossible and flag it as impossible, are quieter, which is why, in a dream, you can fly, or speak to someone long dead, or find yourself in a building that shifts its architecture with each hallway, and none of it strikes you as strange until you wake. The dream is, in this sense, a particular case of something the brain does all the time. Construct a version of reality from available signals, using memory and prediction to fill in anything missing. During waking, the external world provides constant input that anchors and corrects the construction. During dreaming, that external anchor is mostly withdrawn. The brain runs on internal signals alone, and the result, generated from memory, emotion, and the particular firing patterns of the sleeping nervous system, can feel completely real from inside it. Researchers have in recent years found ways to make the study of dreaming more direct. In lucid dreaming, a person becomes aware that they are dreaming without waking from the dream. They can sometimes steer the dream's events, or at least observe them with a kind of detached clarity. And in careful experiments, lucid dreamers have been able to communicate with researchers while remaining in the dream state, moving their eyes in pre-agreed patterns, or making specific small facial movements in response to questions delivered from outside. The dreamer answers. The researcher records the response. Two-way communication across the threshold between waking and dreaming in real time. It is a remarkable finding. It suggests that awareness is not a single thing that is simply on or off, present in waking and absent in sleep. It is more like a spectrum of configurations, a range of ways the brain can be organized that each produce their own kind of experience. The dreaming brain has its experience. The waking brain has its experience. The meditating brain has yet another, and in certain rare states, different kinds of awareness can exist simultaneously in the same person. You don't need to think carefully about any of this. The ideas can simply move through you, becoming softer as they go. Sleep itself is far more active and purposeful than it can seem from the outside. The sleeping brain is not resting in any simple sense. It is working on a different set of tasks with a different rhythm, but working nonetheless. One of those tasks is memory. During slow wave sleep, the deep stages that precede and follow the dreaming stages, the brain produces brief bursts of coordinated electrical activity in the hippocampus, a region that sits curled within the inner surface of the temporal lobe, and that is essential to the formation of new memories. These bursts, called sharp wave ripples, seem to act as a kind of replay. The brain revisiting the experiences of the day, strengthening the connections that encode them, gradually transferring them toward longer-term storage in the cortex. This nightly process is one reason that sleep deprivation impairs memory so consistently, and it is one reason that learning tends to consolidate not in the hours after study, but in the night that follows. The sleeping brain finishes the work the waking brain began. It takes the day's raw material and quietly makes it part of you. The dreaming brain, meanwhile, may be doing something different. Something related not just to information storage, but to emotional processing. During REM sleep, the amygdala, a structure involved in registering the emotional weight of experience, is highly active. But the chemicals that normally amplify stress responses are suppressed. This unusual combination may allow the brain to revisit emotionally significant experiences in a kind of protected space, to process them without being overwhelmed by them, to gradually soften their intensity. There is evidence that people who sleep poorly after a difficult experience are more likely to develop lasting distress from it, while those who sleep well, and perhaps dream about it, often find it more manageable by morning. Sleep, in this sense, may be a form of overnight emotional metabolism, a way the brain digests not just information but feeling. And all of this, the memory consolidation, The emotional processing, the cycling through rhythms and stages, happens without your conscious involvement. You don't decide to replay the day's memories. You don't choose which emotions to soften. The sleeping brain manages it all, quietly and competently, while consciousness recedes to wherever it goes in deep sleep, which is itself a fascinating question that has no settled answer. Where is consciousness during dreamless deep sleep? The question sounds almost like a riddle, and in a sense, it is. The honest answer is that we don't know. Some researchers suggest that consciousness doesn't go anywhere, that it diminishes gradually as brain activity shifts, becoming less integrated, less coherent, until there is simply not enough organized complexity to sustain the kind of awareness we recognize when we're awake. Others suggest that even in deep sleep, some residual form of awareness persists, that the brain never entirely abandons a minimal kind of monitoring, even when it records nothing we would call experience afterward. What we do know is that the transition into and out of sleep is not a simple switch. It is a gradual dimming and brightening, with many intermediate stages. And some of the most interesting things happen in the transitions. In the hypnagogic state, the threshold between waking and sleep, the brain is doing something that doesn't quite fit either category. Thought becomes less controlled, less linear. Images appear without being summoned. Associations form that waking logic would never produce. For many people, this state has the quality of arriving somewhere unexpected, of the mind surprising itself. Some people hear their name spoken, clearly and distinctly, when no one has spoken. Some see faces or landscapes that shift and transform. Some have the sense of falling, which triggers a sudden muscle jerk, a hypnic jerk, that brings them briefly back to waking, heart slightly quickened, before they settle back down and approach the threshold again. These experiences happen in the gaps, in the spaces between defined states of consciousness, where the brain's usual organizing structures are loosening, and something more fluid and associative takes over. They are not worrying. They are the normal texture of the descent into sleep. They are your brain, finding its way down. Let yourself follow that descent. There is nothing here that needs attention. Just the gradual, natural settling of things. One of the most striking demonstrations of how fragile and specific conscious awareness comes from cases in which people lose very particular aspects of it, while retaining everything else. There is a condition, rare, and usually resulting from specific brain injury, in which a person loses the ability to recognize faces, not the ability to see faces, not the ability to recognize other things, just faces. The neurological name for it is prosopagnosia, and people who have it can describe a face in detail. The shape of the nose, the color of the eyes, the arrangement of the features, without being able to say who it is. Even their own reflection can seem like a stranger's. What is extraordinary about this condition is that it reveals face recognition as a specific, separable capacity of the mind, handled by a distinct region of the brain, the fusiform gyrus, located in the temporal lobe. Damage that region, and that specific form of knowing is lost, while everything else remains. A person with prosopagnosia can still recognize you by your voice, your walk, your characteristic laugh. They can still feel that they know you, even if the face alone doesn't carry that knowledge. And in some cases, researchers have found that a residual trace of recognition persists below the threshold of awareness. Changes in heart rate or skin conductance, when a familiar face appears, even when the conscious mind reports nothing. The face is recognized by something, just not by anything the person has access to, just not by consciousness. This kind of split between what the brain knows and what the mind experiences appears in many forms across many conditions. And in each case, it sharpens the same underlying question. What is the relationship between neural activity and conscious awareness? Why does some processing produce experience, while equally sophisticated processing produces nothing that the person is aware of? Researchers have proposed various ways of thinking about what makes neural activity conscious. One influential framework, developed over recent decades, proposes that consciousness arises when information is broadly shared across the brain, when signals from many different regions are integrated into a single coherent representation that is accessible to a wide range of cognitive processes. This is sometimes called global workspace theory. The idea is that most neural processing is local, confined to specific regions, doing specific jobs without much interaction with the rest of the brain. But occasionally, information becomes available to a global workspace, a kind of broadcasting system that distributes it widely. And it is this wide distribution that creates awareness. What enters the workspace becomes conscious. What stays local does not. This framework helps explain blindsight. The information is processed locally, in regions that handle the visual details, but it never makes it into the global workspace, never becomes broadly available, and so never becomes conscious. It also helps explain the absent seizure. The seizure disrupts the global broadcasting system, preventing information from being widely shared, and consciousness collapses. When the seizure ends, the system restores itself, and awareness returns. Global workspace theory doesn't solve the hard problem. It doesn't explain why broadcasting information should feel like anything at all, but it offers a useful way of thinking about which neural events tend to produce conscious experience and which don't. It is one of the more empirically grounded frameworks in consciousness research, supported by a substantial body of brain imaging data. Another framework takes a different approach. Rather than focusing on the spatial distribution of information across the brain, it focuses on the quantity and quality of information that a system can integrate, how richly a system's parts are connected and interact with one another. This framework, developed by the neuroscientist and psychiatrist Giulio Tononi, is known as integrated information theory. It proposes a measure, denoted by the Greek letter phi, that captures how much more information a system generates as a unified whole than the sum of its parts would generate independently. According to this view, any system with a high value of phi has conscious experience. Any system with phi equal to 0 has none. What is unusual about integrated information theory is that it doesn't restrict consciousness to brains. In principle, any sufficiently integrated system could have some degree of experience. A very simple system would have a very small phi, perhaps a minimal flicker of something, while a complex, richly connected brain would have a much larger phi and a correspondingly richer experience. The theory doesn't make any particular claims about what that minimal experience would be like at the lower end of the scale, but it opens the door to a kind of continuity of awareness across very different systems, rather than treating it as something that suddenly appears at a certain level of complexity. Both of these frameworks, global workspace and integrated information, are serious scientific proposals, supported by evidence, actively debated among researchers, and each illuminating in its own way. Neither has solved the hard problem. But together they represent the kind of careful, incremental work that is slowly narrowing the space of possibilities, slowly bringing the question into sharper focus, even if the final answer is not yet in sight. And perhaps that is enough for now. To know that the question is being asked seriously and with great care. To know that consciousness, your consciousness, the simple fact of this moment, is not something that science has decided to ignore, or declared unanswerable, or set aside as too mysterious to approach. It is being approached carefully, patiently, with a kind of sustained, quiet wonder. You can let your thoughts slow now. There is no need to hold on to any particular idea. Let the frameworks and the names and the details soften at the edges, the way the outlines of things soften when the light is very low. What remains when the details go is something simpler, something that was there before the words. The feeling of being here, the feeling of existing in this particular moment, on this particular night, with the quiet around you and the gradual loosening of the day. That feeling, so ordinary, so constantly present that you rarely stop to notice it, is the phenomenon at the center of everything we have been exploring. Consciousness is not a distant scientific abstraction. It is this, exactly this. The quiet awareness that is happening right now, without effort, without instruction, as naturally as breathing. You don't need to understand it to have it. You have always had it. And tonight, as you settle further into rest, it will soften and shift, moving through its own gradual transitions, until it becomes the awareness of dreams, and then perhaps the deep, still quiet of dreamless sleep. And then in the morning, it will return, recognizably itself, as it always does. For now, let it simply be here. Let it be enough. There is a moment, somewhere in the approach to sleep, when the boundary between thinking and drifting becomes genuinely unclear. When you can no longer be entirely sure whether the image that just appeared behind your eyes was something you imagined or something that arrived on its own. That uncertainty, soft, unhurried, slightly dissolving, is one of the most honest experiences the mind offers. It is the mind catching itself in the act of loosening its grip. And it is a good place to be. We have been moving through the landscape of consciousness slowly, without urgency, exploring what it is, what it depends on, what happens when parts of it are interrupted or altered. And as we move deeper into this night, the territory ahead becomes stranger and more open, because some of the most remarkable things we know about consciousness don't come from the study of ordinary waking minds. They come from the edges, from conditions that push awareness into configurations that most of us will never encounter, and that reveal, precisely because of their strangeness, something essential about the structure of the thing. Consider what happens when the two halves of the brain are disconnected from each other. The brain, as you may know, is divided into two hemispheres, a left and a right, each mirroring the other in rough anatomy, but differing in the particular tasks they tend to handle. In the ordinary brain, these two halves are in constant, rapid communication, linked by a thick band of fibers called the corpus callosum. Signals cross between them hundreds of millions of times per second. The result is seamless. A unified experience, a single stream of awareness, no felt sense of division. In the middle decades of the 20th century, Surgeons attempting to treat severe epilepsy discovered that severing the corpus callosum, splitting the brain, in effect, could dramatically reduce seizures. The patients who underwent this procedure often seemed, in daily life, remarkably unchanged. They could walk, talk, work, carry on relationships, pursue interests. Nothing about their ordinary behavior suggested that anything profound had shifted. But in careful laboratory tests, something remarkable emerged. When information was presented to only one hemisphere, by flashing an image briefly to the left or right visual field, which connects preferentially to the opposite hemisphere, the two halves of the brain responded differently, and sometimes contradictorily. The left hemisphere, which in most people manages language, could name what it had seen. The right hemisphere, which had seen something different, could not name it, but could draw it, or select it from a group of objects with the left hand. Or controls. More striking still, when the two hemispheres were shown conflicting information and asked to respond, each sometimes seemed to be operating on its own version of events, with its own preferences, its own reactions, apparently unaware of what the other half had perceived. Researchers who worked closely with these patients, including the neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga, found evidence suggesting that each hemisphere had developed something like its own perspective, its own stream of processing, perhaps in some sense, its own awareness. Whether this means that splitting the brain creates two separate conscious beings, sharing one body, is a question that remains genuinely open and genuinely extraordinary. Most researchers are cautious about going that far, but the split brain studies made clear, beyond any doubt, that the unity of conscious experience, the sense of being a single, coherent self, is not simply given. It is produced. It is held together by physical structures. And when those structures are altered, the unity can be altered too. The self, it seems, is not the source of the brain's organization. It is one of the brain's products. Let that settle quietly. You don't need to feel unsettled by it. If anything, there is something restful in it. The self you carry, with all its memories and preferences and small habitual ways of being, is something that your brain generates, maintains, and refreshes, moment by moment, with enormous care and skill. It is real. It is genuinely yours, and it is also like the seamless visual field and the continuous flow of time, a construction, a particularly beautiful and intimate construction, built from the most complex matter in the known universe. You can let your body be heavier now. Let the muscles of your face soften. There is nothing here that requires holding. The edges of consciousness, the places where awareness fades, distorts, or takes unfamiliar forms, have taught scientists a great deal. And some of the most important lessons have come from the most challenging circumstances. From people who exist in states of severely reduced or ambiguous awareness, and from the careful researchers who have learned to look for signs of inner life where it might easily be missed. A coma, in the common understanding, is a state of complete unconsciousness. The person is absent, unreachable, as if the lights have gone fully out. And for some patients, that is an accurate description. But in recent decades, advanced brain imaging has revealed a more complicated picture. Some patients who, by all standard clinical measures, appear completely unresponsive, who show no purposeful movement, no response to commands, no sign of awareness that medical observation can detect, turn out to have significant neural activity when examined with functional MRI. In carefully designed experiments, these patients have been asked to imagine performing specific mental tasks. Imagine playing tennis, the researchers say. And in some patients, the regions of the brain associated with imagining tennis light up, clearly and distinctly. Imagine walking through your home, and the spatial navigation networks activate, following the shape of a route through remembered rooms, not randomly, not incidentally, in exactly the patterns that would appear in a healthy, fully conscious person performing the same mental tasks. These patients are thinking, they are responding, they are, in some meaningful sense, aware, even though nothing in their outward behavior suggests it. The awareness is there, but the pathway from inner experience to outer expression has been blocked. The mind is present, the body cannot show it. The researcher Adrian Owen, whose work in Cambridge and later in Canada has been central to this field, found that by assigning specific mental tasks to represent yes and no answers, some patients could use brain activity to communicate, to answer questions about their experience, whether they are in pain, whether they know where they are, whether they want continued medical intervention. Simple questions, but of immense importance. And the patients, some of whom had been classified as vegetative for years, could answer. What this work has changed, beyond the lives of specific patients and families, is the conceptual landscape. It has made it impossible to treat absence of behavioral response as equivalent to absence of awareness. It has shown that consciousness can persist in conditions where it was assumed to be gone, and it has deepened the urgency of finding better tools for detecting it, not because we need to resolve every philosophical question about what consciousness is, but because there are people whose inner lives depend on whether we ask the right questions in the right way. It is humbling and important work, and it points towards something larger. The possibility that awareness exists along a continuum, taking many forms and degrees, some of which we have barely begun to learn to recognize. Breathe slowly. Let your awareness rest at whatever level it naturally settles. There is nothing required of it right now. In thinking about consciousness across different degrees and conditions, researchers have inevitably turned to the question of which other creatures might share in it, and to what extent. This is not merely a philosophical curiosity. It bears on how we understand consciousness itself, on what we take it to require, and on whether it is something that emerged recently in evolutionary history or something that has been present in different forms across a much longer span of life. The question of animal consciousness is complicated by the same basic problem that makes human consciousness hard to study. We cannot observe experience from the outside. We can observe behavior and infer from it. And behavior, it turns out, is suggestive in many more species than was once assumed. Crows and ravens, for instance, demonstrate problem-solving abilities that require something beyond simple reflexes or fixed behavioral programs. They plan for the future, caching food in locations that other birds don't know about, selecting tools appropriate to a task they have not yet encountered, apparently modeling the minds of other birds in order to anticipate what those birds will do. This last ability, sometimes called theory of mind, was once thought to be uniquely human. The evidence that corvids possess a version of it has required researchers to reconsider what cognitive sophistication really depends on, and whether the large mammalian brain is the only structure capable of producing it. Octopuses offer an even more striking case. These animals have nervous systems organized on an entirely different plan from vertebrates. Roughly 2/3 of an octopus's neurons are not in its brain at all. They are distributed through its 8 arms, each of which can process information and coordinate movement with a degree of autonomy that has no parallel in the vertebrate body. An octopus arm can react to stimuli, manipulate objects, and solve simple problems, even when the connection to the central brain is severed. The octopus does not experience the world from a single central vantage point, in the way that we do. Its awareness, if it has awareness, may be something more distributed, more plural, 8 semi-independent streams of sensing and responding, coordinated but not unified in the way human consciousness is unified. What it is like to be an octopus, if it is like anything at all, may be something that human imagination can only gesture toward. And that limitation is itself informative. It suggests that the form consciousness takes is not fixed. It is not one thing with the human version at the top of a ladder and everything else arranged below. It may be a wide and varied landscape, with many different configurations of experience, some of them sharing features with ours, and some of them so different that we barely have the concepts to describe them. Even at the far simpler end of the scale, in insects, in single-celled organisms, in creatures whose nervous systems are almost vanishingly small by comparison, behavior arises that raises interesting questions. Honeybees, with fewer than 1 million neurons, can navigate across kilometers of unfamiliar landscape and communicate the location of food sources to their hive mates through a precise and abstract dance. They can learn to distinguish between different human faces. They have been shown to grasp concepts like same and different, an ability that requires flexible, context-dependent thinking rather than simple stimulus-response association. Whether there is anything it is like to be a bee, whether any flicker of experience accompanies these impressive computations, is a question that cannot yet be answered with confidence. But the behavior itself is enough to make the question interesting. And at the very bottom of the scale, there are single-celled organisms that navigate toward food and away from harm, that integrate chemical signals from the environment and respond adaptively. They have no neurons at all, no brain, no nervous system, no synapses, and yet, in some minimal sense, they are doing something that rhymes with the behavior of aware creatures, detecting the world and responding to it in ways that serve their persistence. Whether this constitutes anything like experience, even the most elementary flicker, is a question that current science cannot approach directly. But it is a question that certain theories of consciousness take seriously. You don't need to resolve any of this. Let the animals and the gradations and the open questions drift past, like shapes in slow water. Among the theories that take most seriously the possibility of very widespread awareness is one that goes by the name of panpsychism. It is an old idea, far older than modern neuroscience, but it has found renewed attention among some philosophers and a smaller number of scientists who find it worth considering precisely because of the hard problem. If we cannot explain how subjective experience arises from non-experiencing matter, they suggest, perhaps we should reconsider the assumption that matter is non-experiencing. Perhaps in some minimal and unfamiliar form, experience is present wherever matter is present, not as a fully formed awareness, not as anything resembling human consciousness, but as a fundamental feature of physical reality, the way mass or charge are fundamental features. On this view, the brain does not create consciousness from nothing. It integrates and organizes pre-existing experiential properties into the rich and coherent form we know from the inside. The hard problem doesn't disappear under panpsychism. There are serious difficulties with the view, including the challenge of explaining how simple proto-experiences combine into complex, unified ones. But it changes shape. It becomes less about explaining the origin of experience and more about explaining its organization and integration. Most neuroscientists remain skeptical of panpsychism. The mainstream view is that consciousness is a biological phenomenon, something that emerges from sufficiently complex and organized neural activity, and that has no presence in systems that lack that organization. The debate between these positions is ongoing, careful, and unresolved. And in its unresolvedness, it is honest. It reflects the genuine depth of the question. What is striking about this particular edge of consciousness research is how quickly it opens into much larger questions. Questions about the nature of matter itself, about what the physical world is made of at its most fundamental level, and whether that level has any relationship to experience. These questions touch the territory of physics as much as neuroscience, and in some of the more speculative corners of that territory, the two fields have begun, tentatively, to approach each other. Some researchers have proposed that quantum mechanical processes might be relevant to consciousness. The most discussed version of this idea was developed by the physicist Roger Penrose and the anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff, who proposed that quantum events occurring within microscopic structural components of neurons, structures called microtubules, might play a role in generating conscious awareness. The proposal is controversial, and the majority of neuroscientists and physicists find it unlikely. The warm and chemically noisy environment of the brain seems poorly suited to maintaining the delicate quantum states that the theory requires. And the existing evidence for quantum effects in neural processing is, at present, very thin. But the proposal has value even in its controversiality. It keeps open the question of whether consciousness might be connected to the deepest and most fundamental layers of physical reality, layers where our ordinary intuitions about cause and effect, about the separateness of objects, about the nature of information, begin to break down. If consciousness does touch those layers, then understanding it might require not just better neuroscience but better physics, a new framework for thinking about what matter is and what it can do. That is a distant prospect. Perhaps a very distant one. But distance, in science, has a way of becoming nearness with sufficient patience and time. And the questions that feel most impossibly remote are often the ones that end up, decades or centuries later, having yielded the most extraordinary answers. For now, though, the questions can rest. And so can you. Let the ideas soften further. The theories and the frameworks and the names and the open debates, let them become background, like the sound of wind moving through trees somewhere outside, present, but not requiring anything of you. Just texture. Just the quiet hum of a universe that is far more interesting than any single answer could contain. Your breathing has probably found its own slow rhythm by now. Your body knows what it is doing. The brain running the whole quiet operation, maintaining your heartbeat, keeping your temperature steady, preparing the neural conditions for sleep, is doing it all without your input, without your conscious direction, exactly as it always has. You don't need to manage any of it. You never did. There is something restful in that realization. The part of you that needs to watch and decide and control is not the whole of you. It is a layer. Important. Genuinely yours. Resting on top of vast processes that run themselves. And as sleep approaches, that layer becomes thinner, more transparent. The watching and the deciding gradually recede, and what remains is something quieter and more fundamental. Something that has been there all along beneath the thinking. What that something is, whether it is a residual form of awareness, or the simple biological fact of a living body maintaining itself, or something in between, is not a question with a settled answer. But its presence is not in doubt. You are here. The night is here. And the slow, patient universe is here, doing what it has always done, continuing somewhere above you, beyond the ceiling and the roof and the still air of the night. The sky is doing what it always does. It is simply being there. Open and dark and extraordinarily deep. Whether you can see it or not from where you are lying, it is present. That same sky that has been overhead every night of your life, and every night before you were born, and every night since the earth first cooled enough to have a surface to look up from. The stars in it are not performing for anyone. They are simply continuing their slow, ancient work. Fusing hydrogen into helium in their cores, radiating light in all directions, moving, almost imperceptibly, along their long orbits around the center of the galaxy. And somewhere in that galaxy, on a small planet circling an ordinary star, a brain is lying in the dark, aware of itself, wondering what awareness is. That is the situation. Stated simply, without any decoration, it is already one of the most remarkable things that can be said. The universe has, in at least one place, arranged matter into a configuration that experiences itself, that looks outward at the cosmos and inward at its own processes, and finds both of them genuinely astonishing, that asks questions it cannot yet answer, and keeps asking them anyway, with patience and with care. You are that configuration. Right now. In this quiet room, in this particular moment of the night, you don't need to do anything with that. It is not an instruction. It is simply a description. A way of locating yourself in the larger picture, before the larger picture softens and recedes. And the only thing that remains is the very immediate, very simple fact of rest. Let your eyes stay where they are, closed and still. Let your hands be wherever they have settled. The thoughts that remain, if any remain, can be as loose as they like. They don't need to go anywhere or add up to anything. We have come a long way through this night's exploration, through the hard problem, and the split brain, and the dreaming mind, through blindsight and absent seizures, and the patients who communicate with researchers using nothing but the patterns of their own neural activity, through the theories that try to capture what consciousness is, and the philosophical possibilities that lie at the very edge of what science can currently say. And now, in this last part of the journey, the territory becomes quieter, less concerned with explanation, more interested in simply remaining present with the mystery, the way you might sit beside something vast and beautiful without needing to name it. Because the honest conclusion of everything that consciousness research has found so far is that the question remains open, not in a frustrating way, not in a way that suggests the inquiry has failed, in a way that reflects the genuine depth of what is being asked. The deepest questions are not the ones that resisted the first attempts to answer them. They are the ones that reveal new layers of complexity with every answer that is found. The ones where progress looks less like a straight road to a destination, and more like a gradual widening of a circle of light in a very large dark space. More is illuminated with each step, and more becomes visible that was not visible before. Consciousness research is in that stage now. The circle is widening. New tools are available that did not exist a generation ago. The ability to record the activity of individual neurons in waking humans. The ability to map connectivity across the entire brain, tracing which regions talk to which others and how strongly. The ability to stimulate specific regions with great precision, temporarily altering or even briefly disrupting specific aspects of experience, and then watching the system restore itself. The ability to image brain activity during sleep and dreaming and meditation and other altered states with a clarity that was unimaginable even 20 years ago. These tools are being used right now in laboratories around the world by researchers who have devoted their working lives to this particular set of questions. Some of them are focused on the neural correlates of consciousness, the specific patterns of brain activity that reliably accompany particular conscious experiences, whatever the underlying reason for the connection. If you show someone a particular image, certain neural patterns appear. Show it too briefly for conscious perception, and those patterns are absent or incomplete. Identifying these correlates, cataloging them, understanding how they change across different states. This is slow, careful, empirical work. It does not require resolving the hard problem. It builds a map of the territory regardless. Others are working on the clinical edge, developing better tools for detecting awareness in patients who cannot communicate, improving the sensitivity and reliability of the methods that researchers like Adrian Owen have pioneered. Each refinement matters. Each improvement in the ability to ask the right question of a brain that cannot answer in the ordinary way potentially changes what is possible for a specific person in a specific hospital bed somewhere in the world. The science is abstract in one sense, and in another sense, it is as concrete and urgent as anything in medicine. And others are working on the theoretical foundations, trying to build mathematical frameworks precise enough to make testable predictions about which systems will be conscious and which will not, and under what conditions. Integrated information theory has generated predictions that researchers are beginning to test. Global workspace theory has generated predictions of its own. The two frameworks, interestingly, make different predictions in certain cases, which means that experiments can, in principle, distinguish between them. That is science working as it should. Competing ideas, each internally coherent, each generating testable consequences, waiting for the data that will begin to adjudicate between them. None of this is happening quickly. Consciousness research moves at the pace that the difficulty of its subject demands. There are no shortcuts. The questions are too fundamental, too entangled with each other, too resistant to easy decomposition. But the pace is steady, and the direction, on balance, is toward greater clarity. Toward a point, somewhere in the future, that none of the people currently working in the field can fully anticipate, where the pieces begin to fit together in a new way, where some insight, building on the accumulated patient work of many researchers over many years, shifts the picture enough that the question finally begins to resolve. It may happen within a generation. It may take longer. The history of science suggests that the timing of breakthroughs is essentially unpredictable, that the moment of resolution, when it comes, often arrives from an unexpected direction, through a connection that wasn't obvious in advance. What is predictable is that the work will continue, that the questions will be asked again tomorrow morning, by people who find them as interesting as they do important, and that the universe, whatever it is and however it works, will continue to be the kind of place where these questions are possible. That, perhaps, is the most quietly remarkable thing of all. You can let the science go now. All the names, and the frameworks, and the experiments, and the instruments, they have done their work for this evening. They have given the mind something interesting to move through, and now they can dissolve back into the general background of things, known and wondered about, no longer requiring attention, no longer requiring anything at all. What remains is simpler. The night is very quiet. Your body is heavy in a comfortable way, the kind of heaviness that comes when muscles have truly released, when the effort of holding yourself upright through the day has finally been set down. Your breathing moves through you without requiring any management. In and out, slow and even, the same rhythm that has sustained you through every night of your life without asking you to notice it. Somewhere in the structure of your brain, the transition toward deep sleep is underway. The waves of electrical activity are slowing. Alpha gives way to theta. The boundaries between thoughts become less distinct. The sense of a continuous, coherent self, that carefully maintained model the brain constructs and refreshes through every waking moment, is beginning to soften and dissolve at its edges. What you are, in this state, is something harder to describe than what you are when you are fully awake. But it is not less. It may, in certain respects, be more fluid, more open, less insistent on the divisions and the definitions that waking consciousness depends on. The philosopher William James, who wrote about consciousness more than a century ago with a clarity and a depth that still rewards reading, described the stream of consciousness as continuous, never truly interrupted, always moving, always already in the middle of something. Even sleep, he suggested, did not break the stream so much as redirect it, sending it underground for a while before it surfaced again in the morning. Recognizably the same stream, fed by the same sources, carrying the same essential character. Whether that image is literally accurate, whether there is indeed some minimal thread of awareness running through even the deepest sleep, is a question that remains open. But as an image, it is a gentle one. The stream continues. You do not have to manage its continuing. You never did. It simply goes as streams go, finding its own level, following the contours of the terrain. Let yourself follow it. There is nothing left to understand tonight. Nothing that needs to be resolved or remembered or held on to. The ideas that moved through this space, the hard problem and the split brain and the dreaming neurons and the patients communicating through thought alone and the theories and the instruments and the philosophical possibilities, all of them can be released now. They were never meant to be grasped tightly. They were meant to be passed through, the way starlight passes through water, leaving a shimmer rather than a mark. What stays, if anything stays, is not a fact or a theory. It is a feeling. The feeling that the thing you are, this aware, experiencing, quietly wondering creature lying in the dark, is something the universe has gone to extraordinary lengths to produce. That awareness is not incidental, not a side effect, not a footnote to the physical story of matter and energy and time. It is, at minimum, a remarkable feature of the cosmos, and at maximum, at the outer edge of what some serious thinkers have been willing to suggest. It may be closer to the center of things than physics has yet been able to say. You don't need to decide which of those is true. The question will still be there in the morning, in the same patient and unresolved form it has always taken. And there will be people, as there always have been, ready to keep working on it, to keep asking, with rigor and with wonder, what it is that is happening when something experiences itself. For now, the asking can rest. The night sky above you, whether you can see it or not, is filled with the light of stars that are millions of years old. Arriving at this precise moment, passing through the atmosphere, perhaps through a window or a wall, reaching the surface of the world where you are lying. Most of it goes unregistered. A tiny fraction reaches your closed eyes, too faint to be detected even if they were open. But it is there. The universe is, in its quiet and continuous way, present, reaching toward every surface. Indifferent, in one sense, in the sense that it produced you, that it arranged itself into the configuration of a being who can notice it. Something more than indifferent. Something that, if you wanted to use a word for it, might be called generous. The night is generous with its silence, with its depth, with the simple fact of being here. The same night it has always been, the same dark that has always been waiting at the end of every day, patient and unhurried and completely without demands. You have arrived at the part of the night where words begin to lose their edges, where the distinction between hearing something and dreaming something becomes imprecise. That is exactly where you should be. There is no further you need to go, no further along in understanding, no further in attention, no further in any direction at all, just this. Whatever this is. The quiet, the weight of the body, the last fragments of thought, drifting now with no particular destination, no longer needing to go anywhere, no longer needing to make sense. Consciousness. That word we have spent this night circling, touching from so many angles, approaching from so many directions, is here right now, in whatever form it takes in these final moments before sleep, soft, unheld, thinning at the edges like fog at the edge of morning, except in reverse, thickening toward the center, sinking toward the deep. You are safe. The night is ordinary and good. The questions are not urgent. The answers, whatever they eventually turn out to be, will wait. If these quiet journeys help you rest, you are always welcome to return to deep somna whenever the night needs a little company. But for now, For this particular night, there is nothing more, just the dark, just the breath, just the slow, unwitnessed continuation of everything. Let go.